Hey everyone, thank you so much for clicking on today's video. Just want to say I really do appreciate everyone that takes the time out of their day to watch, listen, and like and subscribe as well. Thank you for joining me and hope you enjoy today's stories. This story takes place in August of 2013 in the mountains of southern Oregon. I'm a USAF Security Forces airman, military policeman. My girlfriend was at work, and as a swelteringly hot day began to turn into thunderstorms, my buddy Nick, another military cop, and I decided to go explore some back roads and get out of the heat in town. Southern Oregon is crisscrossed with logging roads, some actively used, and many totally forgotten and grown over. Nick and I spent many of our days starting on roads that we knew, finding roads that we didn't know, driving for hours into the mountains, eventually navigating back to the paved roads. On this particular day, with the storm clouds building over the mountains, we set off on a road we had never been on and began the drive in the mountains. After driving for around an hour, we hadn't seen nor heard any signs of other people in the woods. We rounded a bend in the thick fir woods and emerged in a meadow that was totally surrounded by thick aspen groves. The meadow was perfectly flat and eerily still. We both noticed the strange stillness almost immediately. No birds, hardly any insect noise, no squirrels, and certainly no other people. On the far side of the meadow, right at the edge of the tree line, there was a picnic table. The table was very odd, however. It was painted a bright orange and was much larger than a typical picnic table in the park. Remarking on this, Nick drove through the meadow to get a closer look. I remember being apprehensive as we approached. The whole scenario was exceptionally strange. The overall silence of the aspen grove was unsettling. Also, it was nearly impossible to see far into the trees, as aspens grow extremely close together. When we parked by the table, I hopped out of the passenger seat of the truck to check it out. I'm not very tall, only 5'5". Regardless, the table was ridiculously oversized and practically unusable. The seats were nearly at chest level, meaning I would have to climb up to even sit on them. As I was looking at the table, Nick called me over to the truck, and I noticed he was looking back into the aspens. At first I couldn't see what he was looking at, but then I noticed a splash of color that was completely out of place in the thick trees. A small one-man tent was set back in the trees about 50 feet from the strange table. I had an initial feeling of dread and felt certain that there was someone in the tent, and if we could see the tent, they could see us. There were no campgrounds in this area, no people, no main road for miles. Surely someone camping so remotely would be at very least a strange person. However, as we observed the tent, we didn't see any movement or hear any sounds coming from it. Nick suggested I call out. I didn't want to, but I did. "Hey, anyone in there?" I yelled. No reply. Feeling completely on edge, Nick and I thought about driving away and leaving this strange area. But we began to fear for the worst. What if there was a body in the tent? What if somebody had gotten kidnapped? Foolish, I know, but we thought it all the same. After some debate, we decided to have Nick turn the truck around to drive away from the camp, should we need to leave in a hurry. He would be waiting behind the wheel. With my heart pounding, I started walking through the trees towards the tent. I was totally keyed up with my senses on full alert. When I reached the campsite, several things struck me as odd. Backpacks were scattered all over. No fire had been built, no wood collected. The tent was literally full of backpacks and women's clothing. Full of dread, I turned to leave and tell Nick what I had seen. As I left, I heard Nick start yelling. "Let's go, let's get the fuck out of here." Not knowing why he was yelling, I ran back to the truck. When I broke out of the trees, I saw a beat up old Ford Taurus on the road blocking us from leaving the meadow. I immediately leapt into the passenger seat and Nick floored the gas pedal. The car was occupied by 2 men. A third person was laying against the window in the back. As we drove across the meadow, the driver attempted to block us from the road, but Nick drove around them and accelerated the way we had come from. I looked back and saw the car attempting to turn around on the narrow road. Nick drove like a madman, and though I was honestly terrified that they would catch up, we hit the highway without seeing the car again. I still do not know if the person in the back was male or female. I called the state police and they promised to send a trooper out to check the scene. However, I received a call the next day from a trooper stating that the campsite, the backpacks, and the woman's clothing was all gone, though he could tell people had been in the area. The strange table was still by the thick aspen grove. I have not returned to the area and do not intend to. From May 2010 to May 2011, I worked as a security guard at a hydroelectric dam in Virginia. It was a fairly isolated location. If you needed an ambulance, you could expect at least a 20-minute wait. About a month after I was hired, one of the guys at the dam told me that most security guards out there quit after a few days because they get so creeped out being alone at the dam at night, and he was glad I was sticking it out. In truth, it could be creepy. Sometimes at night, when I was patrolling the basement level of the dam itself, I think about the fact that I was 50 feet below the water line on the low side, the only human being in about a 1.5 mile radius. Sometimes I'd hear weird noises in the woods or catch a flash of a shadow while I was inside the dam. It takes a lot to scare me though, and I knew I was either hearing critters in the woods or my mind was playing tricks on me. One night, however, something happened that scared the living hell out of me. It was a little after 11 p.m. and I was sitting in the guardhouse reading a book. Suddenly I heard a tap at the door. What was creepy about the guardhouse at night was that when you had a lamp inside turned on, people could look through the windows at you, but the glare made it difficult for you to see outside. When I heard the tap at the door, I thought it was a bug hitting the glass. It was so faint, and I knew there weren't any contractors at the dam. I had the place to myself. Then the tap came again, more insistent this time. I grabbed my flashlight and opened the door. There was no one there. Then I let the door slip from my hand and shut behind me. To my left, previously concealed by the door as I opened it, was a huge man, at least 400 pounds, wearing a gray sweatshirt and gray sweatpants. The sweatshirt was smeared with fresh blood. My heart started hammering, my blood ran cold. I was so scared I couldn't speak. As it turns out, he was a local fisherman who had been fishing off the bridge over the tail race, and he was wondering why the power company hadn't started back pumping into the lake yet, because they usually started a little before 11, and that was what always drew in the big striped bass. He was smeared with blood because he'd already caught and gutted a couple and wiped his hands on his shirt. He felt really bad when he realized that he approached me basically in the same way that a murderer in a horror movie would have. I'm thankful to this day that I was unarmed security, because if I had a gun, I would have either shot him or accidentally shot myself trying to shoot him. "15 years ago, I went camping with 2 school friends in bushland that backed onto my dad's property in Warri Yallock, Australia. My dad didn't spend much time at the house, but said we could use it as a base to dump any gear we might not need. He also gave me a heads up that he might creep up to our campsite that night and scare the guys I was with. We hiked from the house for about 4 hours through the very dense bush, where we found a clearing and decided to set up our camp. Looking around the place for firewood, we kept turning up a lot of old bones. some so old they almost looked like wood. We concluded that due to the land once being used for farming, it was likely they were cow bones. We came up with a few more theories for the sake of scaring each other, then built our fire, even burning a couple of the wood-like bones just to see what would happen, and settled in. I was woken up by one of my buddies at about 1 a.m. who said he swears he saw torchlight on the tent wall. Excellent, I thought. We sat in silence for a few minutes before the light came back. This was great. I really hammed it up, making up stories about murders in the area and escaped prisoners. The light from the torch fixed on our tent, then switched off. We could hear leaves and sticks moving around outside, and my buddies were on the verge of tears. Then we started hearing whispering outside, as well as some low mumbling. Dad had brought some friends in on the prank? Dedicated. The torchlight came back on and pressed right up on the tent wall, and a hand began tapping across the top while the whispering continued. My dad had brought some friends in on the prank and convinced them to walk 4 hours through the dense scrub in the middle of the night just to shine a torch on our tent? I started to panic. Then it just stopped completely, about an hour after it began. We sat in total silence aside from the sobbing of my buddies, and at dawn packed up and got the fuck out. We got back to the house and Dad was there. He apologized and said he'd planned to come out and see us last night, but fell asleep at his girlfriend's house. We told him about what happened and he was genuinely dumbfounded. Interestingly, I went back to the spot a couple of years ago after telling the story to a friend. We found a small shack made of corrugated iron, pockmarked with bullet holes, a 44-gallon drum full of burned clothes, a pile of firewood, and 2 axes. Who knows if it's related, but it was fucking creepy. This summer, I was out in the dark canyon wilderness of Utah. After 2 weeks of driving and backpacking around the country alone, the plan was a 7-day trip, and after a few days of setbacks, I was on my last night. By this time, I was already a little scared of the dark, but that's just what happens when you are your only company for 3 weeks. Anyway, on the 6th day, I found an awesome elk antler and put it on my shoulders about a mile into the day's hike. As anyone who has poorly packed a pack will attest, just slapping 15 pounds on the top of your pack is a bad idea. About halfway through my planned death march, my hip was getting sore and I blew through the water. I decided that I would stop early and get some water. Luckily, I found a few puddles in a dryish riverbed and made camp. I started boiling some water when it struck me. If there's a skanky water here, there may be a good water upstream. So I went upstream. Just as the canyon boxed out, a little spring filled the bed with deliciously cold, refreshing water. I drank on my hands and knees before realizing I didn't bring my water bottles. Whatever, I hiked the half-mile or so back to the camp and grabbed them. This is where it gets weird. On my trip back up, I kept feeling really vulnerable and uncomfortable. Every little rustle in the bushes set me off. I could hear birds calling in the distance. I kept looking for something following me. I can only describe my emotion as pure terror. It got to the point where I picked up a branch just in case a cougar tried to attack me. I still kept telling myself that it was just paranoia and I'm fine, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I finally got to the water and filled up my Camelback and bottle, constantly looking over my shoulder. The feeling of unease was still with me when I headed back down the gulch. There I came upon a fresh mountain lion print placed directly between 2 that I made on the way up. It's one thing to think that your fears are unfounded paranoia. It's much, much worse to know that they are true. My wife, my daughter, and I joined our troop for a Cub Scout Halloween event at a Boy Scout camp in Colorado. It's a large hilly area tucked away in the canyons. There are lots of campsites up the hill, but further down the road are some cabins. We were allowed to stay there for the night since it's more comfortable than tents. Well, these cabins are about a quarter-mile away from any other buildings or tent areas, so we are nowhere near the rest of the group, and it's just us three in the cabin. We get ready for bed, and as I'm starting to fall asleep, I realize how eerily quiet it is. It is completely still outside, no wind, no rustling of trees, etc. Well, I eventually fall asleep. I'm then awoken very suddenly by a scream inside the room. I sit up and ask my wife if she is okay. She responds yes and checks on her daughter. She is fine. It is now dead quiet again. No noise. The scream is gone. So in a panic, I start walking around the room in the dark. Nothing in the room but us. Maybe it came from outside. So I peek out the window and out the front door. No movement, nothing. But it's pitch black. I can't see anything. Time to buck up the courage, grab my phone as a flashlight, and go check outside. I stand there frozen for a minute and finally work myself up to grab my phone and go outside. I grab my phone, turn on the screen, and see a Halloween update alert from the Simpsons mobile game. What I heard was Homer Simpson screaming from my phone because one of my buildings was done in the Simpsons game. Needless to say, I uninstalled that game and haven't played it since. It took a good 2 hours for my wife and I to fall back asleep.